So how do you build a society from scratch? I mean, really build it. Today we're jumping into a section of the Quran that is basically a blueprint for doing just that. It covers everything from the most personal family dynamics all the way up to the big principles of justice and how a community should be governed.
And right from the get-go, the text itself tells you its mission. The goal isn't to be confusing or hard to grasp. It's about providing clear, practical guidance. The commentary says the whole point is to free people from ignorance by laying down principles that are meant to last. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the big picture framework. Then we're going to zoom right into that inner circle, marriage and family. After that, we'll pan out to look at ethics for the whole community, then the foundations of justice, and we'll finish up with what the text calls the ultimate test of true belief. Let's get started. Okay, so first things first. The entire framework we're about to explore has one primary goal: clarity. The text presents itself as a clear path, one that guides society away from what it calls ignorance and toward a just and complete community.
All right, now we get to see how this guidance is built, layer by layer, starting with the absolute core unit of any society, the family. This section lays out a really detailed set of rules for marriage and family life. Now, to understand what comes next, you have to get this one key word, muhsanat, which translates to protected women. According to the commentary, this word is tricky because it has a double meaning. It can mean a woman who is protected by her husband, or it can mean a woman protected by her family, whether she's married or not. And that little distinction, it's crucial for the rules that follow.
So, the text draws some pretty clear lines about who you can and cannot marry. But then, it addresses a very specific and, complex situation from its historical context. What to do with female captives of war. An exception is carved out for them, and the commentary gives a whole legal framework for how they were to be treated. And this wasn't just a free-for-all. The commentary shows a highly structured system. First, captives had to be handed over to the state for distribution. A soldier could only have relations with a woman who was officially assigned to him. And even then, there was a mandatory waiting period to make sure she wasn't already pregnant. Now, this is really important. Any children from that union were considered legitimate and had full rights. And the mother, she would automatically become free when the master died.
The text also lays out another path to marriage for men who maybe couldn't afford the dowry for a free woman. It allowed them to marry a believing slave girl. But, and this is a big but, only with her guardian's permission. This made sure the union was a formal, recognized thing.
Now, inside that family structure, men are assigned the role of qawwam. The commentary is really specific here. It defines this not as being superior, but as a role of profound responsibility, to manage, to protect, to safeguard, and to provide for the family's needs.
Then, the text addresses what a husband should do if he fears rebellion from his wife. It lays out a three-step process. First, he should advise or admonish her. If that doesn't work, second, he should remain apart from her in bed. And the third step listed is to beat them.
And this is where that extra context from the commentary becomes absolutely essential. The very same source immediately puts a huge asterisk on that third step. It points out that the Prophet Muhammad only permitted this with, quote, great reluctance, and that he constantly expressed his distaste for it. He also directed that if it were ever done, it should never be severe or leave a mark.
So what if the conflict gets worse, to the point where the marriage is breaking down? The solution prescribed is mediation. The text says to appoint one arbitrator from his family and one from hers. The goal is pretty clear. If both people actually want to fix things, this process is designed to help them do it. All right, let's pull the camera back a bit. We're moving out from the family unit and looking at the wider community. The focus here shifts to the ethical rules that are meant to guide how everyone interacts with each other, especially when it comes to money and society. So, when it comes to economics, the number one rule is fairness. The text explicitly says don't just consume each other's property wrongfully. And the commentary explains that this covers pretty much any deal that's morally or legally shady. The ideal? Simple trade, based on real, mutual consent, no pressure, no fraud. This is a really powerful piece of advice about human nature. Don't be envious. The text recognizes that, hey, people are different. They have different skills, different resources. So instead of wanting what someone else has, it says to ask God for His blessings. And then it makes this amazing point. Both men and women will get a share based on what they themselves have earned. Your reward is tied to your effort. The text also creates this really clear distinction between two types of sin.
You've got major sins. These are the big ones, like violating someone's rights, being arrogant towards God, or breaking fundamental social bonds. And then you have minor sins, which are more like small slip-ups. But here's the hopeful part. The text says that if you make a real effort to avoid the major sins, God may just forgive the minor ones.
Okay, now for the biggest circle of all. We're moving from social ethics to the bedrock of the entire system, the principles of justice and authority that are meant to hold the whole society together. In this verse right here, it's presented as the absolute cornerstone of the Islamic political structure. It sets up a very clear chain of command, you could say. At the very top, number 1 is obedience to God. Number 2 is obedience to the messenger, who is seen as the way to practically obey God. And third is obedience to the leaders from within the community. You know, your rulers, your judges.
But what if you have a disagreement with those leaders? What then? Well, the hierarchy has a built-in appeals process. The issue has to be referred back up the chain to the ultimate authorities, God, meaning the Quran, and the messenger, meaning his teachings. Their word is the final verdict.
And that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle. What does the text say separates real belief from just saying you believe? It all comes down to accepting this foundation of divine authority. Now, to really get this last point, we have to define one more term: taghut. The commentary explains this as basically any ruler or any legal system that makes judgments based on its own rules instead of God's law. It's any source of authority that sets itself up as an alternative to the divine. And the text draws an incredibly sharp line in the sand here. There is no middle ground. It says that if you claim to be a believer but you still want to take your problems to be judged by taghut, that's a fundamental contradiction. In fact, it argues that belief in God actually requires you to reject the authority of taghut. And this right here is the bottom line. This is the ultimate test of faith, according to this text. It's not just about what you say. True belief is only real when a person takes all of their disagreements to the prophet for a ruling, and then accepts that ruling completely, with willing submission, and without any anger or resentment in their heart. And we're going to end with a challenge, one that the text itself poses to its audience. It asks people to think deeply about what they've just read, and it leaves them with a question: if this guidance, which covers so much of life in so many different situations, if it came from any source other than God, wouldn't you find it full of contradictions? It's a final thought that leaves it up to you to weigh the source's own claim of divine consistency.